Right, all right. Is it recording? So, we are recording. So, welcome to MidCamp and to 3D Chess Resource Allocation and Project Management with Partial Resources. I'm Chris, this is my colleague Joe, and a funny story about the picture. So, whenever you're preparing for these sorts of presentations, I like to do a little research and pull up some cool imagery, and sometimes I get fast and loose with the images. I know it's going to get me in trouble at some point, but I was thinking, like this, it was so like good, and the opportunity to doctor it a little bit was so tempting. I had to do it, and I also thought, like, boy, if I go back to the office and there's like a cease and desist letter from the Gene Roddenberry estate, that would be kind of cool. So don't forward that on to them, but that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So anyway, so this is a metaphor for Joe and I in our weekly resourcing meeting. And I'll leave it to you guys to figure out which one's me and which one's Joe. Although sometimes I'm in this situation where I'll say, "Damn it, Joe, I'm a salesman, not a magician." So we'll talk a little bit about our organization and how we manage resources across multiple initiatives in our model, and try to make that a sane thing for people to do. Quick 30 seconds about our organization. So we're with Digital Bridge Solutions. We've been around since 2009. We've been MidCamp sponsors since 2015. We work with both Drupal and Magento. Some of our clients are along the bottom. Quick contact information for Joe and I. If you need to get in contact with us after the presentation, feel free to tweet us as well during the presentation. Our Twitter information account is up there. And then don't forget to give us feedback after the presentation as well. I'll flash up the feedback URL. So we're going to talk about 5 things today. We'll do some reflections on what I term as the typical consulting model. We'll talk about market pressures upon that model that we're certainly seeing, perhaps you guys are as well. We'll talk about our solution to addressing those market pressures, implications of the business model that we have, and then we hope to spend 10, 15 minutes talking about just discussion about our model, about how you guys are doing it differently, how we can both evolve our model to be better for our clients. Objectives for today. Would love to just share some perspectives on threats to the agency model, right? That we're seeing, perhaps you guys are seeing as well. We then want to talk about how we've turned that threat into an opportunity. And then finally, we'd just love to foster some discussion about how others in the Drupal community are evolving the agency model to respond to that threat. Those sound cool to you guys? All right, cool. So reflections on the typical consulting model. So I've been in this space for 15 or so years now, in kind of the digital consulting type of environment. And kind of how I came up in this space, or the model I'm most used to, is one we call like the capacity model or availability model, where you put a resource on a client and they are available to that client full time, right? So it's basically the client pays an hourly rate for you to put a body on that account. And typically that model is favored by like technology system integrator type of companies, technology consultants. I worked at an organization called Acuity Group for a number of years where this was our model. And it typically coincides with like an on-site model as well, where you go out to that client's establishment and you exist in their environment for 40 hours a week. So the atomic unit of measure, basically the smallest increment in which a consulting service can be sold, and that model is 40 hours. You put people in that environment for 40 hours a week, and that's what they do. They kind of exist in that model. So that's certainly the environment that I came up in. And what that kind of looks like when you're building out a project is like this. You have a number of resources on that project, and they have varying billing rates, and then you estimate a period of time they're going to be working on a project, and that time period goes through a period of weeks, and they're all there for 40 hours. They're just there in the environment. And as you can see, over a 6-week period, you rack up a lot of cost in that. So it's good to be a system integrator in that model when your client will pay that cost, and you have 4 resources out in that environment, and they're existing and they're doing work out in that space. And so that's kind of the consulting model that I came up in. Perhaps some of you guys are familiar with that model as well, and perhaps Some of you on your laptop or desktop have something that looks just like this, right, for building out your cost points. So that, I'll call that like the historical consulting model that I came up with. And the ways you influence that model, the way you as an organization make more money, is you either change the rate or you change the amount of time. Right? You change the hours, you change the week's time. So those are like your variables that you can play with in that model. So what does it feel like to be inside an organization in that model? Joe?
And this is where I'll speak a little bit to both the developer and project manager perspectives here. So the image I'm going with here is a chessboard, and imagine you are playing an opponent, with the opponent being the constraints and challenges of that project. So I'm a PM, maybe I'm playing the pawn or the rook or the bishop, and I'm solely focused, solely dedicated to this one project, to this one opponent, the challenges of that project. So next week I can anticipate dealing with the same challenges of this project, and I'm also working with the same team. So the other developers on the team I can expect to be on my project next week. From a development standpoint, as a developer, you get large amounts of flow time. So I know that this week and next week I want to be on this project. If I want to make an improvement this week, I can gain the benefits next week. And there's also no context switching, because you're solely dedicated to this one project. You know you're not going to have to switch to another project midday or later in the week. Like this, you can fully immerse in this model. You can fully immerse yourself in one project.
So show of hands for people like who that kind of feels like what your organization works like now, or you've worked in that type of model in the past. About half the room. Right. Okay. So we'll call that like the historical model. Pros and cons to that. So advantages to that model, like if you're the client, your resources are right there. They're available to you all the time. They're focused on your project, and they're dedicated. You don't have to worry about them getting pulled off. They're there in your environment. You know that they're there. They're not going to run off, and you're going to lose access to them if you happen to have a delay. Disadvantages to that, there tends to be a lot of waste in that model. So if that person is in your environment, you're paying for them for 40 hours a week, including the time that they're waiting on you, the client, to come back to them with an answer. So you're paying for the time that they're checking their email. You're paying for the time that they're in the bathroom. You're paying for the time that they're small talking around the water cooler. So there's a lot of waste, because it's unlikely that that person is working 40 full hours on actually your project. They're spending some time just literally consuming oxygen in your environment, and you're paying for that. So there's waste in that model. Misaligned incentives. So if you are the consulting company and the client introduces a delay to the project that stretches out your timeline because they can't get you an answer on something, do you really care in this model? I mean, yes, it's kind of a bummer, but you're still there getting paid. So from the agency standpoint, you don't mind if the client doesn't turn around and answer for you. The client wants to get that product over as quickly as possible so they can decrease their amount spent. So to some extent, there's misaligned incentives in that model. And there's a disconnect between budget and task, right? So you've estimated this 6-week project, you've kind of thrown 40 hours at it for each resource, but you're not necessarily aligning those 40 hours to a given task that those resources are supposed to get done every week. So if they do get that task done, great. If they don't, they're still out there for 40 hours, and now you're going to end up stretching out that timeline and impacting the budget. So it's not necessarily task-oriented in the way those models are built.
One comment here from a developer project manager experience is, are you familiar with Parkinson's law? Parkinson's law states that any task will fill up the amount of time allowed, amount of time given to that task. So you can, given a 40-hour week, there's a tendency to fill up that amount of time, whether that's needed or not. And that can account for some of the waste. And depending on the client's size, maybe that's a huge deal, right? For some of the clients, a 40-hour work week for one person could push them out of the range of their budget.
Other models, so I get, like, not every agency works in that model, right? So that's kind of the place I came up with. But other types of organizations use other types of models. I understand, like, there's typical ad agencies do a retainer model, right? Where you pay oftentimes a large block of money for like a whole year worth of services, and that agency runs projects against that, and then at the end of the year you kind of recalibrate and say, hey, did we use more than the retainer amount or use less? Typically an ad agency model, like that's the Mad Men model, right? They work on retainer, and sometimes they work a lot for a month, and sometimes they work a little bit, but kind of all evens out for the end. Project fee model as well. So see, sometimes you just estimate, hey, I'm going to build your website, and it's going to be 15 grand. And you don't necessarily estimate the hours against it, you just kind of put a fixed fee around it, and maybe have a couple of those things going on at once. A lot of times a freelancer will use that model as well, right? They'll just say, all right, this is how much I charge for this particular service, and maybe they juggle a couple of these at once. So get it, right? Not everyone works on the capacity model, but those are all more like historical models. Market pressures on those on the agency models. So democratization of technology, I would argue, is one of the things that exerts pressure on that model. And what I mean by that is that across multiple areas of our environment, we now have access, or people and organizations have access to technology that allows them to do things that in the past only a smaller segment of people that were allowed to do, or only a smaller, more fortunate or more wealthy group were allowed to do. That's everything from like the cell phone in your pocket that is a music playing device and a camera and a video recorder and allows you to have email and supercomputing and all that stuff, to like drone devices where basically as a consumer you can get access to pretty much the same version of a device that like the military has, right, or a large organization has. So this is, enabling people to get access to technology a lot cheaper than it were in the past. It also gives rise to the industry that we're in, right? So there's all these tools out there, Drupal, WordPress, Magento, that allow you to build a highly functional, complex site that would have cost you a lot of money to do 15, 20 years ago. Now you can do those things a lot more inexpensively with the tools that are available through the just democratization of technology effect. And there's also implications kind of on the practitioner side in terms of how you learn technology and get access to become skilled in these areas.
Yeah, if you're not a project manager, developer, designer, you can become one today. You can sign up for Elance, which allows you to, say, hey, I'm available for this kind of work, and you can get started today. Or 99 Designs, where you can practice and develop your design skill. And if you don't know what you're doing, just look at Stack Overflow, right? Like you can navigate your way through the technology field with little or no experience.
So implications on that, on the agency landscape, basically new entrants across all over the place. So you got new clients, right? New types of clients that couldn't afford this type of service in the past that now can. So new organizations that now can afford a highly functional, highly complex website, couldn't do that in the past. Also gives rise to all of us in this room. Show of hands for people who work at an organization that's been around for more than 15 years. A couple, right? Like the Palantir, for example, was very cutting edge in this space, like one of the early leaders of this kind of digital revolution. But a lot of us work for organizations that are newer because there wasn't space for us in the past. Now there's opportunity for us to serve this new segment of clients. And practitioners, as Joe mentioned. So there's a new type of people, a new kind of working class, a new digital worker in this space that didn't exist perhaps 20 years ago, that now through these tools is able to educate themselves on how to work in this industry. Other pressures on the capacity model. So there's rate pressure, right? So our clients are also recognizing that there's lots of other new practitioners in this space, and those practitioners work potentially cheaper than before. So the number of agencies that are a number of clients that are going to pay $150,000 for a 6-week project is diminishing because they're realizing they can get that service elsewhere for cheaper. Offshore, freelancers, people kind of working off hours and weekends. So the enterprise segment probably will still continue to pay those rates for some foreseeable period, but even they are starting to recognize, boy, I spent 150 grand on this 6-week project. I've got an agency that's based out of Kazakhstan, and they're going to charge me $40 an hour. So I'm going to go with them, right? Even if there's waste and rework in that process, they can mess it up 3 times, and it's still going to be cheaper than my other U.S. agency alternative. So pressure on that model because of rate pressure. Changing workforce as well. So Joe can speak to this a little bit more detail, but the people working in this industry now have different interests and needs, and they're just not going to work in that same model that I came up with.
So from a technology standpoint, there are some amazing advancements, and as developers and PMs know, it changes so fast. And the reality is, if you're not working on the type of projects you want, or not working for the organization you want, there's always going to be another job. The average tenure of a developer is about 2 or 3 years. So there's a new demands on having work that you find interesting, compatible with your skills, and able to learn and develop new skills along the way.
I call this is the millennials issue, right? This is so in my day, right, back in my day, when you were on a project and you got staffed on a project in the middle of Indiana, and you were on that project for a year, you went to that project, you walked uphill to the client both directions, and it snowed every day, and you liked it. And you said, please thank the client, thank you, may I have another. And that's the environment that I grew up in. This generation of workers, they're not going to do that. They're not going to kind of exist in that type of environment anymore. They want something more challenging, that's a little bit more flexible, and a bit more fast-paced. So let's talk about one agency, Digital Bridge, our solution for how we address evolving the agency model to adapt to those market pressures. A quick summary on basically our business model. So we work with mid-sized enterprises primarily. We provide full site development. We also do hosting and support and maintenance. And our target industries are what we call brand manufacturers, so people make a finished good and sell it primarily through a wholesale channel, but are starting to go direct to consumers. And we also target business-to-business finished good manufacturing distributors. So those are the folks that we're going after. Implications of going after those folks on our model, the capacity model doesn't work for them. They don't have the type of funds. They're mid-sized organizations. They're not going to pay 150 grand for a 6-week project. They're just not. So that model doesn't. They kind of reject it on cost alone. And they don't necessarily need you to be in their environment, right? A lot of our organizations don't even have space to put a team of consultants. They want you to work remotely. So just a different type of feel. We as an agency, though, still like the time and materials approach, where there's an hourly rate for a resource. So what that means is that our estimates and rates are no longer based on the time it takes for somebody to just exist and consume oxygen in your environment, but they're more based on a task, right? So our resource allocations are based off of how much time we think it's actually going to take to do a task, and then recognizing that there are dependencies. So before Joe can do his work, probably means there's some requirements that need to be gathered or design that needs to be created first. So I can then stagger Joe's time until those things are available for him to actually to work on. So as a result, our clients basically get allocated partial weeks of a resource. They don't get a full 40 hours, they get a portion of those 40 hours. None of our clients could afford all of our a full team for 40 hours anyway, so they get a portion of that. And as a result, each resource then works on multiple projects, 2 to 4 projects per week probably. The result, implication then is you have more projects to fill up that time. So what does that kind of sound like, where you have a fixed capacity and you're trying to put as many things into that fixed capacity for your resource that's going to be there for 40 odd hours a week, and you're trying to minimize those gaps or the periods where they're not doing something, not utilized. It's basically Tetris, right? That's kind of what our organization does, is like you have this 40-hour week and you're trying to slot times into that person, and that means they're doing multiple things for that 40-hour week, and you're trying to minimize the number of gaps that organization has. So that's kind of how we approach this problem, is by just taking a person, taking each team member, and then subdividing their time so they're working on multiple things. The client still gets what they want without having to pay for the availability of a full project team. So what does that look like on the inside?
So we have a spreadsheet essentially that we call the big board, and it lists all the projects on the left side, some of our support projects or ad hoc, and then days of the week along the top. So you fill in, you can see Jimmy, he's on project 1 for 4 hours every day that week. Then you get into cases where, all right, so it looks like Jimmy has 6 hours allocated on Friday. He's got 2 extra hours. Maybe that's internal time. Maybe that's used for professional development, something like that. Now, naturally, this gets into some competition where, let's say Wednesday, Jimmy's got a launch on project 2, but support project 2 actually needs Jimmy. So instead of Jimmy being able to do support project 2 on Wednesday, he's going to do it on Thursday. So maybe you have to shift some of the time around when you're allocating. And then there's also the case where, all right, well, what happens if, project 1, support 1, and some ad hoc, they each have high priority launches happening that week. How do you address that? You have 3 very important urgent issues. Well, maybe you can do them in parallel. Maybe there's a different resource for each one of those, and you're fine. But if it's the same person, maybe you have to shift around expectations of the client and say, Mr. Client, Tuesday would be ideal, however, will Wednesday work for you? And maybe you have to reprioritize those expectations. Or maybe you shift another project. Maybe project 1, this is kind of a lighter week for project 1, so maybe we shift around some of Jimmy's time and to allocate some time for whatever is higher priority. So what does this feel like as a PM developer? This kind of feels like Alexandra. She's known as, apologies, I can't say her last name, but she's known as the Queen of Chess. And this image here shows her, she's going around to it's a chess simul, where essentially you have multiple chess games going on at once. So what ends up happening is you need to, like from a PM standpoint, you need to be able to anticipate and know what are the challenges for each of these projects. And you go around, when a move is made on each one of these projects, on each one of these chessboards, you gotta, switch over to that chessboard and play back. Which also means you're probably looking at more touch points in a given week to week, because you have different clients you're managing expectations with, and there's greater accountability for time. So if you need to go over to this chessboard and make a play there, but there's another chessboard waiting for you, that becomes very obvious, both internal and external. From a development standpoint, it empowers you to say, all right, chessboard 19 next week, I need more time on this. I need 16 hours instead of 10, or what have you. It also means you're doing context switching. So maybe you've really honed in and perfected this one chessboard, this one situation, but in your week to week, you'll be switching to another project and dealing with different constraints. Maybe there's some similarities, but it does break up some of the monotony and allow you to have new experiences, try out different ideas on the different projects. It does give you opportunities to learn fast. Maybe you learn a certain initial move and you get to try it on 2 different projects that are kicking off.
And at its best, like Alexandra, like she's totally in her element, right? She's controlling the game and multiple games concurrently, and she's energized and kind of motivated by this environment. She's like the master of this process. So at its best, it allows a developer or project manager to kind of continue to stay really energized and engaged. Handling changes. Difficult for our organization, just like any others, but we have a process for that.
So sometimes priorities change, which we kind of touched on already, or maybe there's an outage on one of our client sites, or maybe that launch you had scheduled for Wednesday, maybe that launch took an extra 2 hours, or somebody gets sick. There's an impact to each one of these changes. And from a PM standpoint, you need to keep all the boards in mind and know how, if something has changed over here, how that's going to impact resourcing and timeline for your other projects, which also means you need to know priority. This client, their week might be a little lighter, or maybe this resource has a lighter week next week. So you got to kind of be aware of who's available. From a dev standpoint, it does mean you have to be okay with getting out of the flow, getting out of that high focus time, but also knowing when you need to protect that time and say, I need this heads down time. We got this, deliverable we have to complete by this time. I need this time. And it also means that as a developer, you're responsible for communicating early and often about your estimations and when you expect things to complete. Because if that changes, that's going to affect, it'll have a broader impact. There's collateral damage to going over. Whereas contrasted with a traditional or typical approach, if it's the same project, your expectations are just shifting on that same project. In this case, there might be multiple projects impacted. Now, day to day, the way we deal with this is we have a resourcing channel on Slack, and if something changes and we need to reallocate time on our big board, we'll just talk it through there, and maybe we'll go over to that person's desk and talk it through.
That makes sense? Okay. Implications on our organization of that model. So again, back to the resourcing need, right? So now we're playing this highly complex game where a move at one level can impact another piece of availability another levels down. So it makes our resourcing process more challenging, certainly more interesting, but it's a more complex thing that nevertheless provides a valued service to the client as they get access to this to the service that they would not have been able to afford otherwise. Advantages and disadvantages.
So from an employee standpoint, it's exciting, right? Like you know that any given week, it's not going to be, because you can get into the monotony or the grind of a single project. So it can be exciting to, be able to meet new clients and try new things, get exposure to new ideas week to week, which means that you can keep your skills fresh, and maybe the next project coming along is doing more agile, and maybe from a dev standpoint, the next one's D8 instead of being on a D7 project. You get to try out something new, different, which also means you can learn more faster.
On the agency side, it just helps our organization be more agile, right? So we can respond more quickly since we're doing resourcing on a weekly basis. If a new opportunity comes up, we can shift things around to respond to that the very next week. Or if something is, we scope something out at a certain amount of hours, it turns out to be bigger, we can adjust to that in the flow. It helps us just be leaner with staff, right? So we can take on a lot of projects without necessarily having to have a lot of people dedicated to those projects. We can spread people out across more projects. And it just gives our organization more resilience. So if any individual project ends up taking a lot more time than anticipated, or any individual product shuts off, the spigot shuts off automatically, client says, nope, I gotta take a pause and think about this for a month. Okay, cool. We were doing multiple projects anyway, so we can just fill in that time with another initiative. So it just helps us organizationally kind of ride out some of the ebbs and flows. We're never super dependent upon a single initiative. Disadvantages.
So from an employee standpoint, the complexity and the challenge can can lead to stress because you need to be very aware of how you're managing time, how you're managing expectations. And if you're saying yes to too many things, you can get burnout. You need to be able to manage your time really well and know the things that are going to help you context switch better. So differences between projects, those are going to be really apparent for you, which poses some feedback to the rest of the team, like how can we move forward together to make that context switching easier.
And on the agency side, there's disadvantages as well. So we talked about like being more resilient to handle changes in a project scope. Yes, but there's also ripple effects, right? So if there's one project that ends up taking longer than we anticipated, well, we've already got like that resource already has been planned to move on to something else. And so if they don't get to move on to something else, it causes ripple effects through the whole kind of resource planning, because now you got to recalibrate everything. If somebody was supposed to do something in 20 hours, but it took them 40, well, you already planned for them to do something else with those remaining 20 hours. Friction is kind of built into the model. So in the old consulting approach, like there's typically an argument between the salesperson and the delivery person at the beginning of a project. Say, well, I want so-and-so on this project. And no, but you can't have them because they're on this other project. You have that argument once at the beginning of the project, and the project starts and that team is stacked. Our model, we have resource discussions every week, okay? How much time is this person going to be on that project next week? It's just part of our model. It's not argumentative, but there is inherent friction that's kind of part of the way we go about our business. And limited scalability, right? So just like us or like Anna, the chess queen, we can probably play 5 games of chess at once, but can we play 500? Probably not. So at some point that model changes or needs to change. And there's inherent complexity in just the way we record hours and the way that we invoice. There's just a lot more going on because we're spreading people across initiatives. So obviously in our perspective, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages and allows us to service a segment profitably and at a cost that they can afford that they could not have done in the past. So, discussion. We got 10 minutes left. Does this make sense? And you guys, does this kind of follow what we're doing? Anybody else out there doing anything similar to that?
Yeah, so I think our company is doing something similar. We're small, we're 8 people, 5 of us are developers, and we have many projects in the air at the same time, and so I think we've come to maybe a lot of the same strategies that you guys have. I do feel like some of those disadvantages are hard to gloss over. I mean, they're there, and I think you might feel that those are the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. On balance, from any given day to day, I find that often the disadvantages are overwhelming. Can we go back to that? Actually, the background.
Yeah. You got more disadvantages you want to add?
So, like burnout and stress, for example, like those are 2 things that compound with the other disadvantages on the list. Those cause ripple effects and more friction. They also affect your ability to do context switching.
Yeah.
And so what you get, like if those impacts turn into hard blockers, then you get a hard stop in your pipeline.
For sure.
Right? So
the way we try to manage those things is we've got like to some extent like a meter on each resource that measures how many projects they're spread across and then how much we anticipate their like utilization being, and we literally got a spreadsheet like that turns yellow or red if someone gets over 80% or if someone is spread across 4 projects. We know like that's not sustainable, and so we gotta recalibrate that. So we try to have tools that minimize the amount of burnout and stress, because you're right, it can feel overwhelming.
And one thing I'll add to that too is our whole team is on site in the office, and I have found that especially in stressful situations, just being able to walk over to the PM's desk and have like a one-on-one conversation to kind of talk through complicated scenarios that come up definitely helps with stress and just being able to know that, all right, my PM is fully aware of how I'm feeling. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, one first.
Yeah, I wanted to just piggyback off of that is just how many hours you expect the devs to have quality work done in a day. Like with my company, we try to strive for 6 hours, because 8 hours is pretty much impossible if you want to avoid burnout and stress. Do you have a number that you stick with?
So we allocate 8 hours, but there's probably some assumption that like an hour or two of that is gonna be lost.
Okay, so you build it like into your estimates?
Build that
Yeah, any kind of
lost time
lost time.
to some extent.
Yeah, we also.
For DevOps on Friday, so it's
We have a
35.
we have a full half day on Friday that's just kind of empty time that doesn't get allocated. But on a given day, like on a Tuesday, for example.
Yeah, so one thing that does happen often is like our big board sheet to say, this is our plan for the week. That does change. And having some of those gaps does help in cases where there's fluctuation throughout the week. So there's in reality, there's usually buffer somewhere. So I think in the end, it does work pretty well. But there are definitely cases where, okay, if everything's packed very tight, if something shifts, like that ripple effect is really felt.
So just in our experience, as we've grown, the disadvantages kind of were more loudly voiced by my dev team. So there was a time period when there was about 5 developers on our team, and we were running 15 or so projects to different levels of activity. Of course, some of them it's like one bug that comes up every month, and others are super active. So yeah, I was doing a lot of this, okay, you're going to be on this project, and then this project, and this project on this day, and as we've grown, I definitely had a lot of pushback on that because of the stress and the context switching and the lost time, and they're not able to focus on one project and get anything done. So we've actually moved more kind of to the first model that you were talking about, where I'm trying as much as possible to allocate each resource to one project. It's not possible with the budget of all of our projects for sure, but I'm trying to get it like as closely partnered, I guess, between like one developer, one client as possible. And when I can't do that, I've been trying to limit it to 2 projects maximum per person, because they can't. That's just been my experience with our team. The context switching needs to be too much for them. I've definitely stopped completely giving them 2 projects in the same day. So they can at least focus for one day. So if there's like 6 hours that are needed on one project, I would split it over 2 days. But anyway, that's just been our experience, I guess, of allocating.
Can we go to that question? Can we go to the question slide?
Yeah.
Let's see, what is this? Yeah, so the 4th one there, how do you value learning new things versus focus as a developer? Like, there is a tension between, like, you're on one project for a long time. Like, how does that contrast with, all right, I get to try new things in a given week?
Yeah, that's the new complaint that I'm getting now is, hey, but now I'm on this project all the time and I don't get to do anything new.
Or if you
But
don't
you
like
wanted
that
to focus on one project.
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't like that project, right? I mean, the old model, trudging
Yes.
up the snow for
Yes.
a year. If you don't like it, that's what you're doing for 6 weeks.
Yes.
That's what you're doing for a year. And you're gonna have to finish it.
That's when I just go back to my millennials. They're never going to be satisfied. They're going to find most.
If I could add a comment.
Please.
One thing that I do enjoy, if there is a particular stressful comment, there's always the ability to have that feedback after the project where we can just debrief and talk about ways to improve the next time. Because particular communication is important. Not only communication within the team, but also if, say, for example, there's a task that's running behind schedule, communicating that out to the client, and we can get ahead of that and let them know, hey, this might not be delivered on time. And that way, the developer is not put under that tremendous amount of stress of saying, okay, I need to get these extra 10 or 20 hours out within a certain time frame, but we could get it maybe an extra couple of days of adding for them. So it's really just learning how to communicate better, not internally, but also externally with the client better. And I do think those, when there is that stressful project, and those debriefs internally, and just learning and how to improve those communication points helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Nicholas is part of the Digital Bridge team as well. So yes, we do, we calibrate this currently or constantly through post-mortem meetings after a project's done to say how did that go, what are the things that could have done better, and there's opportunities during a project as well to see if it's just not working or somebody's spread across too thin, we can make adjustments in real time.
And one of the kind of implications of that is in those postmortems, you're going to have people who are part of multiple projects. So the learnings in those meetings are more broad than just the immediate project team, which is helpful.
Just a couple questions that I hope are small. Timelines, because you're paralleling and now resources are a little bit, that also means that each individual project has a longer time of life in your development cycle, right?
Potentially, yes, although you could, to some extent, I think you could argue that a 14-week project that you're billing out at 40 hours a week, again, there's enough waste and kind of slack in that if you just estimated it off of the task time, you may only have 20 hours of actual work. And so maybe if you have that person allocated across multiple projects, maybe you still can get it done in 14 weeks, or maybe you add on a week or two, where you don't substantially stretch out the timeline.
Okay. The other question I had to do with review, code reviews for things. So do you have a gatekeeper in your development process, somebody whose responsibility it is to merge and be the person so in the distributed model, if the person who was the gatekeeper is not allocated enough time to be able to merge in the things that other people are working on, doesn't that create a glut in your weekly development process? Aren't people waiting for reviews now from that person?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. I can say not all projects have peer code review. So you have to balance QA process and how you tie that in.
Yeah.
Typically, to offset that, there is also QA for every ticket that goes out. So it's a challenge. I don't know that I really have a good answer for that.
Neither way.
Yeah.
And one more question comment here.
I was wondering, for handling context switching.
Yeah.
One of the ways that at Palantir we try to help reduce the friction that comes with context switching is by taking ownership of specific parts of the delivery pipeline, so that our dev team knows, regardless of what project you're on, this will always be the same, whether it be a build process or a deployment process, or the way that code is linted. There needs to be some consistency. I'm wondering if there's any parts of the pipeline that you just take full ownership and responsibility of to reduce the context switching for your team.
At present, most developers know how to deploy and do all the things for the client.
We're not trying to make that more consistent across clients, right? So you're not doing it a different way on a different client. You're not there yet, but that's the intent.
But that's an interesting idea, though. If maybe the big board switches a little bit to be more specific about the type of developer. So it's not just a developer; it's this developer handles launches.
In your big board, do you include what they're supposed to be working on, or is it just you're allocated to this project?
We do have a conversation usually about it. For our larger ongoing projects, less so because there's other check-ins that happen. But let's say it's a small support ticket. It might be hey, what are those 2 hours on Wednesday for? Because developers are also giving input and feedback into how they would like their week to go. So maybe they want the smaller chunks of work to be done on Monday and Friday, and have more flow time in the middle of the week.
So we got to wrap up. As you see, the next speaker is waiting impatiently back there. A couple of quick things. So again, contact information, email, Twitter, feedback. There's our join in talk. So love to hear your guys' feedback on this session. Don't forget to sprint this Sunday. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.